3 true stories of haunted hotels that guests fled overnight. There's something about hotels that makes them the perfect setting for a nightmare. Maybe it's the unfamiliar rooms, the endless hallways, or the knowledge that thousands of strangers have slept in the same bed before you. Maybe it's the way the silence at night feels heavier, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. Tonight I'm sharing 3 true stories of haunted hotels, places so disturbing that guests didn't just check out early, they ran out in the middle of the night and never looked back. Our first story comes from a man named David, who was traveling for work in the Pacific Northwest. He'd been on the road for days, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, and all he wanted was a quiet place to sleep. The hotel he booked was an old Victorian building, the kind that looked charming in photos but felt a little too empty in person. The lobby was grand but eerily quiet, with antique furniture and faded wallpaper that seemed to whisper of better days. The receptionist was polite but distant, barely making eye contact as she handed David his key and told him his room was on the 3rd floor. David's room was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway. The carpet was worn, the wallpaper peeling at the corners, and the only sound was the distant hum of the elevator. He let himself in, dropped his bag, and immediately noticed the chill in the air. The window was closed, but the room felt cold, almost damp. He tried to shake off the feeling, blaming it on the weather, and went about his usual routine, unpacking, checking emails, and calling his wife to say goodnight. It wasn't until he turned off the lights that things started to feel wrong. As he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to be a guest. They stopped right outside his door. David held his breath, waiting for the sound of a key in the lock, but instead there was a soft, rhythmic tapping on the door. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced. He waited, heart pounding, but the knocking didn't come again. He tried to convince himself it was just another guest, maybe someone at the wrong room. But as he drifted off to sleep, he heard it again, this time from inside the room. It was faint, but unmistakable, the sound of someone breathing, slow and ragged, coming from the far corner near the window. David sat up, straining to see in the darkness, but the corner was swallowed in shadow. He turned on the bedside lamp, and the sound stopped instantly. The rest of the night was a blur of half-sleep and waking nightmares. Every time David closed his eyes, he felt the weight of someone watching him. At one point he woke to the sensation of cold fingers brushing his face, but when he turned on the light, the room was empty. He tried to laugh it off in the morning, blaming it on exhaustion and an overactive imagination. But as he packed his things, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. On the inside of the window, written in the condensation, were the words, "Get out." David checked out without saying a word to the receptionist. As he walked through the lobby, he glanced back at the grand staircase and saw a woman in a long, old-fashioned dress standing at the top, her face hidden in shadow. She didn't move, didn't speak, just watched him as he left. David never stayed in an old hotel again, and he never forgot the feeling of being told, in no uncertain terms, that he wasn't welcome. Our second story comes from a couple, Sarah and Mike, who decided to take a weekend trip to a historic hotel in New England. The building was famous for its age and its supposed hauntings, but Sarah was a skeptic, and Mike loved a good ghost story, so they booked a room on the top floor. The hotel was beautiful, with creaky wooden floors, ornate chandeliers, and portraits of stern-looking ancestors lining the walls. The staff was friendly, and the other guests seemed excited to be part of the hotel's spooky reputation. Their room was cozy with a fireplace and a view of the town square. The first night passed without incident, but on the second night things took a turn. Around midnight, Sarah woke to the sound of whispering. At first, she thought it was coming from the hallway, but as she listened, she realized it was inside the room. The voices were soft, urgent, and impossible to understand. She nudged Mike awake, but by the time he sat up, the whispering had stopped. They tried to go back to sleep, but the room felt colder, the air heavy and still. Suddenly, the fireplace flared to life, even though they hadn't lit it. The flames danced wildly, casting strange shadows on the walls. Sarah got up to check, but as she approached the fireplace, the flames died out, leaving only the faint smell of smoke. Mike tried to laugh it off, but Sarah was shaken. They decided to leave the room and go for a walk to clear their heads. As they stepped into the hallway, they saw a little girl standing at the far end, her dress old-fashioned and her hair in ringlets. She stared at them for a moment, then turned and disappeared around the corner. When they followed, the hallway was empty. They returned to their room, but neither of them could sleep. Every time they closed their eyes, they heard the whispering, felt the cold, and saw the flicker of flames in the fireplace. At 3 a.m., Sarah had had enough. She packed their bags, woke Mike, and insisted they leave. They checked out in silence, the night clerk barely raising an eyebrow as they handed over their key. The drive away from the hotel was silent, the kind of silence that only comes after you've seen something you can't explain. Sarah and Mike didn't talk about what happened until they were miles away, the old building shrinking in the rearview mirror. Even then, their words felt small compared to the weight of what they'd experienced. They never returned to that town, and whenever someone brought up haunted hotels, Sarah would just shake her head and say, "Some places don't want you there." Our third story comes from a solo traveler named Olivia, who was backpacking across the UK. She'd been staying in hostels and budget hotels, but one night, after a long train ride, she found herself stranded in a small village with only one place to stay, a centuries-old inn that looked like it belonged in a Gothic novel. The sign outside was faded, the windows dark, but Olivia was too tired to care. She rang the bell, and after a long wait, an elderly woman answered and led her up a narrow staircase to a tiny room at the end of the hall. The room was simple, a bed, a dresser, and a small window overlooking the empty street. The wallpaper was peeling, and the air smelled faintly of mildew and something sweet, like old flowers. Olivia thanked the woman, locked the door, and collapsed onto the bed. She was asleep almost instantly, but her dreams were restless, filled with strange images. A woman crying in the hallway, a man standing at the foot of her bed, a cold hand pressing against her chest. She woke with a start, heart pounding, and realized it was still dark outside. The room was freezing, and she could see her breath in the air. She reached for her phone, but it was dead, even though she'd charged it before bed. As she sat up, she heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, dragging footsteps, as if someone was shuffling past her door. She listened, holding her breath, as the footsteps stopped right outside her room. There was a long pause, then a soft knock. Olivia froze, unsure what to do. The knock came again, louder this time. She got out of bed, tiptoed to the door, and peered through the keyhole. The hallway was empty, but she could hear whispering, low and urgent, coming from the other side of the door. She backed away, her skin prickling with fear. Suddenly, the window slammed open, letting in a gust of icy wind. The curtains billowed, and Olivia rushed to close it, but as she did, she saw something in the street below, a figure standing perfectly still, looking up at her window. The figure was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, face pale and eyes dark, almost hollow. Olivia stumbled back, heart racing, and the window slammed shut on its own. She tried to calm herself, telling herself it was just a nightmare, just her imagination. But then she heard the footsteps again, this time inside the room. She spun around, but there was no one there. The air grew colder, and she could see her breath swirling in the moonlight. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, until it was all she could hear. Desperate, Olivia grabbed her bag and ran for the door. It wouldn't open. She fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking, as the whispering turned into a low, guttural moan. Finally, the door swung open, and Olivia bolted down the hallway, not daring to look back. She raced down the stairs, past the empty reception desk, and out into the street. The village was silent, the only sound her own footsteps echoing on the cobblestones. She didn't stop running until she reached the train station, where she waited for hours until the first train arrived. She never went back for her things, never contacted the inn, and never spoke of what happened to anyone until now. Olivia's story spread online after she posted it anonymously on a travel forum, warning others to avoid the inn at all costs. Other travelers chimed in, sharing their own strange experiences at the same place: cold rooms, dead phones, and the feeling of being watched. Some even claimed to have seen the same figure in the street, always staring up at the windows, always waiting. What's most chilling about Olivia's story isn't just the ghosts or the cold or the whispers. It's the sense that the inn itself was alive, aware of her presence, and determined to keep her there. She still has nightmares about that night, about the figure in the street and the voices in the dark. But she's grateful she trusted her instincts and ran, even if it meant leaving everything behind. These three stories have one thing in common: the moment when fear outweighs reason, when the need to escape becomes stronger than the desire to stay. For David, it was the message on the window and the woman on the stairs. For Sarah and Mike, it was the whispering voices and the little girl in the hallway. For Olivia, it was the cold, the whispers, and the figure watching from the street. In each case, the guests didn't just check out, they fled, driven by a terror they couldn't explain and a certainty that staying even one more night would be a mistake. But what is it about hotels that makes them such magnets for the unexplained? Maybe it's the history, the layers of lives and stories that accumulate over decades or even centuries. Maybe it's the transient nature of the guests, the way people come and go, leaving behind fragments of themselves, memories, emotions, fears. Or maybe it's something deeper, something that can't be measured or explained, a darkness that settles in the corners and waits for someone to notice. Whatever the reason, these stories remind us that not all places are meant to be called home, and that sometimes the only way to stay safe is to leave, no matter how late the hour, no matter how much you have to leave behind. For most people, a hotel is just a temporary stop, a place to rest, recharge, and move on. But for those who have experienced what David, Sarah, Mike, and Olivia did, a hotel becomes something else entirely. A place where the ordinary rules of reality seem to bend, where the past and present blur, and where fear can take on a life of its own. What's most unsettling is how quickly a sense of comfort can turn to dread, how a room that felt safe in the daylight can become a prison after dark. After Olivia's story spread online, more people began to share their own haunted hotel experiences. Some described hearing footsteps in empty hallways, others spoke of cold spots and flickering lights, and a few even claimed to have seen apparitions standing at the foot of their beds. The details varied, but the feeling was always the same, a sense of being watched, of not being alone, of something lurking just out of sight. One commenter, who had stayed at the same inn as Olivia, described waking up in the middle of the night to find the room filled with the scent of roses, sweet at first, then cloying and suffocating. She saw a woman in a long dress standing by the window, her face turned away, her hair hanging loose over her shoulders. When the woman turned, her eyes were empty, black as the night outside. The guest fled the room, leaving her suitcase behind, and never returned. Another traveler who had visited the Victorian hotel where David stayed recalled hearing a child's laughter echoing through the halls at 3 a.m. He followed the sound, thinking it was a prank, but found the hallway empty and cold. When he returned to his room, he found the words "Don't stay" written in the dust on his mirror. He checked out before sunrise, unable to shake the feeling that he'd narrowly escaped something terrible. Even Sarah and Mike's story found echoes online. Other guests at the New England hotel reported seeing the same little girl in the hallway, always at night, always silent. Some said she would stand outside their door, staring, until they turned on the lights. Then she would vanish. A few guests claimed to have heard her singing, a soft, sad lullaby that lingered long after she was gone. What's striking about these stories is how ordinary they seem at first. There's no dramatic thunderstorm, no flickering lights or slamming doors, just a slow, creeping sense of unease that builds until it's impossible to ignore. It's the kind of fear that seeps into your bones, that makes you question your own senses, that leaves you wondering if you're losing your mind. And yet, for those who have lived through it, the fear is all too real. For hotel staff, these stories are both a curse and a secret. Most will never admit to anything unusual, but if you catch them at the right moment, late at night, when the lobby is empty and the world feels a little less solid, they might share a story or two. A housekeeper who refuses to clean a certain room alone, a night manager who hears footsteps on the top floor, even when it's supposed to be empty, a maintenance worker who finds strange symbols scratched into the walls, always in the same place, no matter how many times they're painted over. Some hotels embrace their haunted reputations, turning ghost stories into marketing gold. They offer haunted tours, late-night ghost hunts, and rooms with a history. But for every guest who comes looking for a thrill, there are others who stumble into something they never expected, something that follows them home, lingering in their dreams long after they've left. For David, the experience changed the way he traveled. He started reading reviews more carefully, looking for any mention of strange noises or unexplained events. He avoided old hotels, preferring the sterile predictability of chain motels. But no matter where he stayed, he couldn't shake the memory of that cold room, the message on the window, and the woman on the stairs. Sarah and Mike became more cautious too. They stopped seeking out haunted places, choosing comfort over curiosity. But sometimes, late at night, Sarah would wake to the sound of whispering, and for a moment, she'd be back in that hotel room, watching the flames dance in the fireplace, listening for footsteps in the hallway. Olivia, for her part, never stayed in another inn or bed and breakfast. She stuck to big hotels, the kind with bright lights and lots of people. But even then, she'd find herself checking the locks, keeping her phone charged, and sleeping with the curtains drawn tight. The memory of that night, the cold, the whispers, the figure in the street, never really left her. What all these stories have in common is the moment when fear becomes undeniable, when the need to escape outweighs everything else. It's not about believing in ghosts or the supernatural. It's about survival, about trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. For some, that means leaving in the middle of the night, abandoning their belongings, and never looking back. If you've ever felt uneasy in a hotel room, if you've ever woken up in the dark and wondered if you were truly alone, you're not alone. These stories are a reminder that sometimes the scariest places aren't the ones we expect. They're the ones that seem perfectly normal until they're not. So the next time you check into a hotel, take a moment to listen. Pay attention to the silence, to the way the air feels, to the shadows in the corners. And if you ever feel that creeping sense of dread, don't be afraid to trust your instincts. Sometimes, the best decision you can make is to leave, no matter how late it is, no matter how much you have to leave behind. There's a reason haunted hotel stories linger in our minds long after we've heard them. They tap into something primal, the fear of the unknown, the vulnerability of sleeping in a strange place, the unsettling thought that the past can reach out and touch us in the present. For David, Sarah, Mike, Olivia, and countless others, a hotel stay became a turning point, a moment when the ordinary world slipped away and something darker took its place. But what happens after you flee a haunted hotel in the middle of the night? For many, the fear doesn't end at the front door. It follows you, clinging to your thoughts, coloring your memories. David found himself replaying every detail of that night in the Victorian Hotel, the cold breath on his face, the message on the window, the silent woman on the stairs. He tried to rationalize it, to tell himself it was just exhaustion or a trick of the light, but the memory never faded. Sometimes, when he stayed in a new hotel for work, he'd wake up in the dark, heart pounding, convinced he heard footsteps in the hallway. He'd check the window for messages, the corners for shadows, and only relax when the sun came up. Sarah and Mike, too, carried their experience with them. They became more cautious travelers, always double-checking reviews and avoiding any place with a history. But the memory of that night in New England lingered. Sarah would sometimes wake from a dream, certain she'd heard whispering or seen a little girl standing at the foot of the bed. Mike tried to comfort her, but he had his own nightmares, visions of the fireplace flaring to life, of shadows moving just out of sight. They never spoke about it with friends, afraid of sounding crazy, but the fear was real. It changed the way they saw the world, made them more aware of the thin line between safety and danger. Olivia's story became a warning she carried with her everywhere. She never told her family the full truth, afraid they'd worry or think she was imagining things. But she never forgot the cold, the whispers, the figure in the street. She started keeping a small flashlight in her bag, just in case, and always made sure her phone was fully charged before going to bed. She avoided old inns and remote villages, preferring the anonymity of big city hotels. But sometimes, when she was alone in a new place, she'd feel that same chill, that same sense of being watched, and she'd wonder if she'd ever truly escaped. For all three, the experience was a lesson in trust, trusting their instincts, trusting the feeling that something wasn't right, even when there was no logical explanation. It's easy to dismiss fear as irrational, to tell yourself that ghosts aren't real and that old buildings are just noisy. But sometimes, fear is a warning, a signal that you're in danger, even if you can't see it. The people in these stories listened to that warning, and it may have saved them from something far worse. The truth is, we may never know what really haunts these hotels. Maybe it's the weight of history, the accumulation of grief and loss and longing that seeps into the walls. Maybe it's something darker, something that feeds on fear and loneliness. Or maybe it's just our own minds, playing tricks on us when we're most vulnerable. But whatever the cause, the effect is the same, a sense of unease that grows until it's impossible to ignore. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room that feels wrong, don't be afraid to leave. Don't worry about what people will think, or about the inconvenience of packing up in the middle of the night. Your safety, your peace of mind, is worth more than a night's sleep or a lost reservation. Trust your instincts, and remember that you're not alone. There are countless others who have felt the same fear, who have made the same choice, who have fled into the night and never looked back. And if you do leave, don't be ashamed. Share your story if you can. You never know who might need to hear it, who might be facing the same fear and looking for a reason to trust themselves. The world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit that you're afraid. As you listen to these stories, as you think about your own experiences, remember that fear is not weakness. It's a survival instinct, a gift that has kept us safe for thousands of years. The next time you check into a hotel, take a moment to listen, to the silence, to the creaks and groans of the building, to the feeling in your gut. And if something feels off, don't be afraid to act. Sometimes the only thing standing between you and something you can't explain is the courage to walk away. So, whether you're traveling for work, for fun, or just passing through, keep your eyes open and your mind sharp. The world is stranger than we think, and sometimes the scariest stories are the ones that happen when we least expect them. If you ever find yourself packing your bags in the middle of the night, remember, you're not alone, and sometimes leaving is the bravest and smartest thing you can do.